Morning, everybody. You know, when I can't be around on Sundays, which I hate, I like to get the very best level of teaching pastor that I possibly can. And so I go as high up the religious hierarchy as I can, and you can't go any higher than the Pope. And so I have today James Pope. He actually is a member of Summerville Baptist Church, and so several of you already know him. James comes from a really strong background as a church planter. He's from Texas. He planted a church in Baltimore, which is like one of the toughest places to start a church according to the North American Mission Board. And not only did it survive, it thrived into a multi-site, huge church reaching a lot of people. So James comes as a voice of authority on listening to God today, and it's something that we all need a daily reminder of. I know I do. I'll be watching this streaming, and so God bless you, and please, as you always do, give James Pope that warm welcome that he deserves. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to start off the sermon a little differently than we normally do. Who knows who Ricky Nelson is? Ricky Nelson, all right. We're going to start off with one of his songs. You can sing along if you know it. I went to a garden party, reminisce with my old friends, a chance to share old memories and play our songs again. When I got to the garden party, they all knew my name, but no one recognized me. I didn't look the same, but it's all right now. I learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. People came from miles around, everyone was there. Yoko brought her walrus, there's magic in the air. And over on the corner, much to my surprise, Mr. Hughes hid Dylan's shoes, wearing his disguise. But it's all right now, I learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. I hear some of y'all singing. You gonna come sing? You gonna sing a little bit today, or just let me sing it? All right, he's gonna let me sing it. Here we go. I played them all the old songs. I thought that's why they came. No one heard the music. We didn't look the same. I said hello to Mary Lou. She belongs to me. When I sang the song about a honky-tonk, it was time to leave. But it's all right now, I learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. Someone opened the closet door, and out stepped Johnny B. Good, playing guitar like a ringing a bell and looking like he should. If you gotta play at garden parties, I wish you a lot of luck. But if memories were all I sing, I'd rather drive a truck. But it's all right now, I learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. Sing it with me. See, it's all right now, I learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. Pastor Pope, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, we began with that song because I know that everyone will leave saying at least the first part of the sermon was really good. And we could have used more of that, and I appreciate Braden's accommodating. And of course, you know, I look at this crowd, and many of us sort of share a generational framework in life. When I requested him do this song, he did not know the song. But I think he did a pretty good Ricky Nelson in person. Yeah. Now, some of you remember Ozzie and Harriet from the 50s. That rings a bell. In 1952, he joined the show as Ricky Nelson. And he was on the show up until he became famous as a rock musician. He was asked to play in a band in the late 50s. And you know what his real name was? It wasn't Ricky. Anybody here know what his real name was? Eric Hilliard. Now you know why he went with Ricky. So he became a sensational star. He became a movie star. He had some big hits going into the 60s. And part of that rock and roll movement. Interesting thing happened, though, when the British invasion took place, those boys from Liverpool, it sort of sucked the air out of the musicians' wind in this country. Now, Ricky had moved from doing just strictly rock to doing they called it country rock. He was sort of ahead of his time in respect to that. And so he sort of faded into the woodwork because the Beatles were taking over the scene. And then in 1971, somebody had a great idea. Let's have a nostalgic concert, and let's bring back the old guys from the 60s. And so in 1971, in Madison Square Garden, they hosted this event that had he and Bo Diddley and Little Richard and some others come and perform. And so when he came out on the stage, and this song talks about that event, and most of us were not aware of that. When he came out on the stage, he did his early stuff when he was a teen idol and when he became a young adult. And then he shifted gears and wanted to do some of his newer stuff, and he actually did a country version of Honky Tonk Women that was put out in 1969 by the Rolling Stones. An interesting thing happened. Booing started in the balcony, and the booing continued until he finished the song, and he was so put out by the booing that he walked off the stage and didn't finish his set and did not come back for an encore. Y'all know that? Listen to the lyrics one more time, because they do play into our subject matter today. You were listening to him, but you probably weren't hearing what was said. He said, went to a garden party. That was Madison Square Garden. To reminisce with old friends, a chance to share old memories and play what? Our songs again. When I got to the garden party, they all knew my name. No one recognized me. I didn't look the same. He didn't look like the teen idol there. This is what he looked like, with a purple velvet shirt, long hair, and bell-bottom pants. He was not recognized as the little Ricky that they'd all come to love. And then he goes into the chorus, but it's all right now, I've learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. People came from miles around. Everyone was there. Yoko brought her walrus, John Lennon. There was magic in the air. And over in the corner, much to my surprise, Mr. Hughes hid in Dylan's shoes wearing his disguise. George Harrison was there. Played them all the old songs, thought that's why they came. No one heard the music. We didn't look the same. I said hello to Mary Lou, Chuck Berry. She belongs to me. When I sang a song about honky tonk, it was time to leave. But it's all right now. I've learned my lesson well. You see, you can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. Someone opened up a closet door, and out stepped Johnny B. Good, playing guitar like a ringing a bell and looking like he should. If you got to play at a garden party, I wish you a lot of luck, but if memories were all I sang, I'd rather drive a truck. Which was a tribute to Elvis Presley. Because when Elvis first appeared on the scene and was trying to make a name for himself, he was told he would never make it as a rock musician. He'd be better off driving a truck. You see, what Ricky Nelson thought he heard that day was not really what he heard. He thought the crowd was booing him because he was doing new stuff and not the old stuff. What he didn't realize that there were some, imagine this at a concert, drunken patrons in the balcony that were causing a disruption. And the police came in to escort them out. The crowd was booing at the police and not at Ricky Nelson. The only booing he heard was booing that was not for him. You see, hearing is one of our five senses. It's one that we take for granted until we sort of lose it. And if a musician in a live setting could hear a sound and draw a conclusion that was completely wrong because he heard and yet did not hear, how much of a problem is it for us generally to hear and not hear? Now, my wife and I have been members here for, a year and a half or so. We came here right when y'all first opened back up last May after COVID. And my wife and I, we were sitting down like on the 5th or 6th row over here, and your air conditioning works really well in here. And my wife is like a lot of you other well-traveled women. She's thin blood and thin-skinned, and so she gets cold real easy. Are you with me? Now, I know some of you men are that way now, too, so don't get all worked up. So we're sitting down there, and she's like, it's really cold right here, because she could feel that air moving under the pews forward. And I said to her, well, you could move closer. And she said, what would moving closer to the stage do for me? All right, I'm going to read our text. If you're wondering this device I have in my hand, I'm not an insecure husband who feels like they have to carry their TV remote with them everywhere, but this is a remote so that Fred can get a break on controlling the slides, and I'll be doing that at this point forward. So I'm going to read our text. We're going to, there we go. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Now, this is out of the International Standard Version, which I doubt anybody here in the room has, so that we're all literally on the same page. We're going to be looking at the same words. And then I'll explain why this text serves as the backdrop to today's message. The Lord sent you, talking to Saul, on a mission. Go and completely destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they're destroyed. Why didn't you obey the Lord, but grabbed the spoil and did evil in the Lord's sight? Saul told Samuel, I did obey the Lord. I went on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I brought Agag, king of Amalek, and I completely destroyed the Amalekites. The people took some of the spoil, sheep, cattle, and the best of what was to be completely destroyed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. Samuel said, does the Lord delight as much in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the Lord? Surely to obey is better than sacrifice. To pay attention is better than the fat of rams. Indeed, rebellion is the sin of divination, and arrogance is iniquity and idolatry. It was a year ago while y'all were in lockdown and you came back out that Pastor Randy and I got to go backpacking in the upstate, the foothills of the Appalachian. If he ever invites you to do that, turn him down, just give you in advance. About the only thing you're going to see of him is his backside going away because he's a beast on the trail. But anyway, on our way back, I appreciated the time with. On our way back, he was concerned about what the pandemic was doing in church life, and he asked me. He said, "If I have to go in quarantine because I get COVID, would you stand in for me?" And I said, "I'll be glad to do that." Now, I don't know who's been praying real hard for a whole year that he doesn't get sick, but I'm glad you took a break so I get to come at least today and do this without Pastor Randy being sick. And so we've talked about a year about the opportunity when I would be able to come and do this. And so when he invited me to speak today, then the question is, what does the Lord have to say to Summerville Baptist today? And I actually asked him, I said, so what series are you going to be in? And I'll be glad to simply do the next text. Or do you want to assign me a subject? You know, I want a direction to go in. He says, no, you just decide what's to do. And so we were back home in Texas back in June, and I was having my quiet time looking out at pasture land at my brother-in-law's house, and I was reading this passage in 1 Samuel chapter 15. And what I heard was, preach about hearing God. And I'll explain a little bit why as we move forward in our subject matter. Now, many of you will be familiar with this passage. You know, Saul's the first king that Israel had. He got off to a great start, and then he fumbled the ball, dropped it, and God raised up David to take his place. Saul had a pretty good run in there as king. He got to do what he wanted to do. He honored God with what he did. And then came this passage when God gave him and his army a fresh set of instructions. I want you to go in and completely decimate the Amalekites. They're my enemy, their enemy, eradicate them. And Saul and his army went, and they didn't do the job. And they came back and they encountered Samuel. Now, Samuel was a prophet and a priest and a judge. He's the only person that held all three offices. And he was actually the last judge that Israel had. And he met Saul, and Saul said, I did everything God said to do. And you recall the passage, Samuel goes, then what's that bleating of sheep in my ears? And Saul said, well, we did what God said to do, but the people brought back the best because we want to offer that and sacrifice that to God. And that's where Samuel asked this question. Is God just interested in crossing T's and dotting I's? Is he not more interested in what? Your obedience than in your compliance to the letter of the law? And I realize in this passage, Saul heard but didn't hear. So let's move forward. Let's fill in some blanks because time's going to get away from us. There needs to be that disclaimer slide up here that says the content and the format has been re-edited to fit in the time allotted. So we're going to run out of time, so let's go ahead and move on. So let's answer a couple of questions. Why is this such a critical issue? Why is this subject matter such a critical issue? We got a couple of reasons here. Number one is because of the range of perspectives. Now, I've been doing ministry for a long time, and I realize that about every subject matter that we talk about is on a continuum of some kind. You've got the beginning end down here, the left end, you've got the other end down here, and they fall somewhere along this spectrum. And the perceptions and the perspectives aren't just in one place on this when it comes to the matter of actually hearing God. Because, the questions that we're not asking because they're assumed is, does God speak? Does God speak? Can God actually be heard? Is it possible to hear God? Now, if you have been raised in an evangelical environment, such as the Summerville Baptist Church, and it's what you've heard your whole life, then you've never stopped to ask the question because it's a part and parcel of your theology and your ecclesiology. And you know the language, you know the definitions, but there's a whole world of people out there that haven't shared that journey that you've shared. And so here, let's talk about these four perspectives of the issue of, number one, the spiritual antagonist. Spiritual antagonist. Now, you may not realize it, but every one of us knows atheists. There are atheists in our lives. Most of them, they keep a low profile for obvious reasons. They don't share our belief in the Bible. They don't share our belief in Jesus. They don't even share our belief that there is a God. Most of them in America and around the world, they're low-profile atheists. But there are a few that are militant atheists. They feel that they're not content just to not believe. They feel called to challenge the faith that you and I have about God. And let me give you a couple of examples. Richard Dawkins, you may or may not know these names of these faiths. He's a biologist, and he's the one who calls militant atheism to sort of challenge Christian belief. The second of these is Sam Harris. He's a younger version. He has a doctorate in neuropsychology, and he likes to poke fun at people that believe in God because he simply doesn't understand it, and he wants to argue from a psychological standpoint why it's unhealthy for you and for me to believe in God. And then there's Christopher Hitchens, a journalist and author. He's no longer among the living. He parted this life, and Christopher Hitchens was one who loved to make caricatures about people of faith. He would create a straw man that he believed depicted you and me, and then he'd poke fun at it and get the crowd laughing about it. He loved doing that. He was a good author. He wrote some good books, but he was very cynical in his view. And I'm convinced now, because he's no longer among the living, that he's torturing the devil. Because he's telling the devil, you don't really exist, I don't have to believe in you. And I think the devil is hoping for a resurrection to get rid of Christopher Hitchens. The fourth of these, and this may be the most annoying one, is Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman was a New Testament scholar. He teaches at Princeton School of Theology. He has all the advanced degrees, and for many years, he was an evangelical, Southern Baptist, Bible-believing Christian. Somewhere along the way, he chucked it all and said, none of it is true. Now, there's no subject matter out of all the things that you and I believe about God that they like to poke more fun at than what? This business of hearing God. Because they think prayer is just insanity. Simply because there is no God, then who are we talking to but ourselves? And I think the atheist antagonists, their position is best summarized by one of my patron saints, and that's Dr. Gregory House. Any fans here of Dr. House? Some of you may know this quote. He says, when you talk to God, you're religious. When God talks to you, you're psychotic. You see, for the atheist antagonist, Darwin is their prophet, reason is their God, and evolution is their gospel. And they believe that those things explain everything that you and I believe and don't believe in. So one of the reasons this is such a critical issue is we live in a world that everyone does not believe, number one, that God exists. Number two, that God is engaged. You can put an agnostic in there who says, I think there might be, but I'm not sure he is engaged. And certainly he's not interested in my life, my personal life, and he's not someone that I can speak to and expect to get a response from. And so it makes this issue huge for us on hearing God. The second category, the spiritually curious. And I would put most people that you and I know, the life around us, I would put them in this category. And that is, these are the people that don't know if it's true or not true. They're okay if it is true. They just don't know that it's true. And they wonder because they hear you and I talk about God as though he is real. And if we get a chance to talk about our relationship with Jesus, the fact that we're using the word relationship is curious to them. And then certainly if we believe that God speaks and we're able to hear him somehow, they have a curiosity about that, but they're not really sure how to satisfy that. And unfortunately, it's good God-fearing Christians that are making it difficult for them to do that, but that's for another day. The next category are the spiritually undeveloped, or we might say underdeveloped. And that is this category of people who at some point they've been introduced to the gospel. It can be through a personal relationship. It can be through having read a gospel tract. It can be through watching a religious program. It can be any of a myriad of ways. And they have prayed a sinner's prayer in some form or fashion. You know, God be merciful to me, a sinner. That's a sinner's prayer. Or a commitment of faith. And they've come into this relationship with Jesus, but they've not been discipled. Nobody's walked them through what it means and what it looks like and where you go from the starting point and what your destination is in this life. That whole discipling thing of what it means to live for God and have a living relationship with him so that he's a vital part of every day of your life. And so they've simply not been taught about really what it means. And they hear the last category is the one that really adds sort of confusion to this, and that is the spiritually confident. The spiritually confident is that person who has no doubt about their relationship with Jesus. They know that they know that they know that they know. It's settled for them. God is real, Jesus is real, the Holy Spirit is real. They walk with him, they talk to him, they even sing the old songs about that. And then they come around in context and they will make the statement like, God told me to do this, or God told me to do that. And they speak as though it's a daily occurrence. And so the people in the other three categories are listening to somebody saying, God told me this and God told me that, and they're stepping back, and the first one going, well, they're nuts. And the second one going, well, isn't that curious? And the third one's like, wow, how does that happen? And how does that work? I can honestly say, I don't know that God has ever told me anything. God has made known to me a lot of things. You see, when we talk about hearing God, we think of it being an acoustic, like the sound of the voice that I'm speaking now. We know that there's sound waves being generated by my vocal cords, and you've got an eardrum and a hammer and anvil in there, and if it's working right, for some of us not so much so, that's a physical phenomenon. And so typically when we talk about speaking and hearing and God speaking and hearing, and the Bible is so replete with this. I realized that when I got into this subject, it is a giant bowl of spaghetti, and the longer I eat it, the bigger it gets. Which means we'll never satisfy the whole issue this morning. And I told Pastor Randy, you've got a series you need to do after this, because I'm just going to tee it up for you. But when you and I talk about hearing or God saying something, don't we mean it more literally than perhaps assumed? And then for those people who say, well, I've never, it's like Charles Stanley. Many of you may be fans of his. In 1982, he was up for re-election as the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And he made a public statement. He said, God told me to allow my name to be submitted for re-election. And a reporter cynically asked him, so did God speak audibly to you? And Charles Stanley said, no, he spoke louder than that. See, you laugh because you understand that distinction. So it's such a critical issue because we have this perspective, and all of you are part of one of these, if not more than one of these. So the second thing is, hello? Yeah, let's go ahead and put them all up there, fill in the blanks. But because of the range of needs, and these are the three categories that for our purposes, I would put political leaders up there, but I'm not sure they're on the same wavelength as God is, but I'll leave that for another discussion. That in this room, there are individual needs, and that is as a person, whether you're a young adult, or whether you're a median age adult, or whether you're an older adult, it doesn't matter what gender you are. If you're a Christ follower, then your desire is, what is it that God wants me to know in order that I can do what God wants me to do? And if that's the case, how do I hear from him if he's not heard audibly? How do I hear him? How do I not end up like Saul, who heard but didn't hear? Or like Ricky Nelson, who heard but didn't hear? Or my beloved wife, who heard but didn't hear? So this is a word for you to help you go from where you are to that place to where you can recognize the voice of God. The second of these churches, and this is really sort of what inspired this direction in this subject matter. Because as we look around, this is August the 1st, okay? This is and look, there are a lot of people in church on August the 1st. I don't know if you know that, but that's not normal. Is it okay for some of you? You're not normal? Those of you who were here when Pastor Randy first came, the church didn't look like this back then, did it? No. Somebody told me that in the second service, when he first came, there were as few as 30 people. Such is not the case. When I look around, I know in church growth circles, because this has been in my life, is that when a church reaches 80% capacity, it's considered full. Parking lot, classrooms, worship space. So when I look around, I think, wow. Now, Pastor Randy told me, he said, when I came here 4.5 years ago, he said, I had no idea we're going to be here at this point in time, this soon in the journey. And so the question is, what do you do now? What do you do next? You put up a blinking neon sign out front that says no vacancy. Now, while you may like sitting on top of each other because you love each other in Jesus, you take a poor sinner that hasn't hung around with a bunch of saints, they're not going to want to sit in your lap. They want a little breathing room. And how do you make room for those? So I realized that Summerville Baptist Church needs to hear God. What's the Lord saying that you need to hear? In that last category, church leaders. I think you know how blessed you are to have the leadership team that you have. You've got a children's director that knows how to fold a fitted sheet. She got my applause. I leaned over to Braden and I said, you can tell she works for children. Evidently, she needs to teach a few adults to do that. But how blessed you are to have the leadership team you have and have Pastor Randy. I was so looking forward to standing up this morning and said, hi, I'm not Randy, because he always introduced himself, but that was sort of taken away from me. You're blessed, but then you have the challenge that comes with the blessing. What do we do now and what do we do next? Do you think maybe, just maybe, individually, you need to hear God? As a church, you need to hear God. And the leadership team, and certainly Pastor Randy, they need to hear God. Now, let's make a distinction here. There is a line to be drawn between hearing from and hearing. I have a couple of grown children. Now, while I love to hear from my children, I had much rather hear my children. Hear? Yeah, see, there's a difference there. We can say, listen, we can hear from God all day long. But in the moment that we're living, the frame of the movie that we're living, for us actually to perceive that he is speaking a word in context and in time to us in this moment, because we actually are hearing him. How important is that? All right, the second question. So how do we reorient our thinking? Because if we distill it down and we automatically think it's acoustically that somehow you should be able to hear God and I'm not hearing God, so there must be something wrong with me. So how do we reorient our thinking in a biblical fashion? We're going to look at a few passages to help us do this. Scenario number one, we're calling this Spies' Tales. Spies' Tales, and we're going to look at a couple of different passages. Numbers chapter 13, I'll tee it up just briefly. This is the scene where Israel has come out of Egypt. It's taken them a couple of years to get across the wilderness where they're standing on the Jordan, and Moses sends in, a group of spies, a representative from all 12 tribes, and says, go in, and they went in, and they took 6 weeks to take the trip. And they came back, and this is what happened when they came back. He says, we arrived at the place where you sent us, they reported, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey. Furthermore, this is its fruit. Except that the people who have settled in the land are strong and their cities are greatly fortified. We can't attack those people, the men who were with him said, because they're too strong compared to us. Then Joshua gave orders to the officials. Oh, back up. So they put out this false report to the Israelis about the land that they had explored. The land that we've explored is one that devours its inhabitants. All the people whom we observed were giants. We also saw the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak, compared to the Nephilim as we see things. Important expression. We're like grasshoppers, and that's their opinion of us. You need to understand, of 40-something years of preaching, I've been pretty hard on Moses about this scene right here. Because God gave them a promise. He gave it to Abraham first. And then he gave it to Israel when they were leaving Egypt and said, it's yours for the taking. And when they get there and they send the spies in, they take 6 weeks. They bring back a cluster of grapes so big it takes a group of men to haul it. They come back and say, yeah, it's really a cool place. But as we see things, they are too big for us. We are as grasshoppers in their eyes. Now, that was bad enough for them to bring that report. The mistake that I think Moses made was he had an election. He says, okay, of you spies, all in favor of taking the land. Let's see your hands. 2. All opposed, same sign. 10 said no. And so what they do? They let the majority rule. They did not get to possess the land. So recently, as I'm reading through my quiet time, I find myself having been through this, and I come to Joshua. Joshua succeeds Moses as the leader. After 38 years of wandering around, he finally brings them to the same place, the Jordan River, casting a wistful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land. But it's a different story. Look at the story. Then Joshua gave orders to the officials of the people. Go through the camp, he said, and command the people, prepare provisions for yourself, because within 3 days you'll be crossing the Jordan River to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So go get it. Before the scouts had lain down, he sent 2 spies in. They went to Jericho. They went to Rahab's place. Before they laid down, she went up to them on the roof. I'm really convinced that the Lord has given you the land, she said, because we're overwhelmed with fear of you. All the other inhabitants of the land are demoralized at your presence because we heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea right in front of you as you were coming out of Egypt. And what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard these reports, we all became terrified and discouraged because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. I have read this passage at least 50 times. At least 50 times. And the last time I read it, I saw something that I had not seen the 49 times before that. While these 2 spies were listening to Rahab, they actually heard God. Because Rahab said to them, everyone on this side of the Jordan is traumatized because they heard what God did 40 years ago. And they're still like this because of you. You see, what the spies heard, they heard from God. God says, see, if you'd just trusted me the first time, we wouldn't be here this time. You see, even before they sent the spies in, Joshua went around and said, okay, everybody get ready, because in 3 days, we're going to take the land. There's not going to be a vote. They heard through Rahab the voice of God that says, I deliver what I promise. They are scared to death of you. Scenario number 2, noise cancellation. This is huge for us because we're surrounded by noise. Noise cancellation. 1 Kings chapter 19. This is Elijah after being on Mount Carmel and having seen God, come down and accept his offering, and the fire lick up the water and the stones and everything, and now he's real depressed because of this great victory, and he's having a pity party. And so he goes before God, and the Lord said to him, go out, he responded, and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord. And there was the Lord passing by. A tremendous mighty windstorm was tearing at the mountains and breaking the rocks in pieces in the presence of the Lord. But the Lord was not in the windstorm. After the wind, there came an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a sound of a gentle whisper. Now, those of us who grew up with the King James Version of the Bible, those last words were a still small voice. Does that sound familiar? The Hebrew word here does not mean still small voice. It means a whisper. You see, Elijah was needing to hear from God a fresh word. And God put him in a place where there's all kinds of stuff happening that are ascribed to God. But they are not God, and they're not even the sound of God. You see, some of you may know this, but there's actually a technology that exists today. It's called noise cancellation technology. For every sound, there's a counter sound. If you have a high-end automobile, you probably have a device in there that's listening to your environment. It's finding those tones and those sounds, and it's producing the counter sound that cancels them out to our ears so we don't hear them. You see, one of the keys to hearing from God is, maybe that's the reason the prophet said, be still and know that I'm God. Because if we're expecting to hear sort of God's voice to fit into our busy, cluttered schedule, we're only deluding ourselves. More times than not, God is much easier heard when we're being still and we're listening for a whisper. Oh, the lesson. We missed the first lesson, didn't we? Where'd that go? There it is. We need to learn what to listen to and for. Don't you love technology? Number 2 is we need to learn how to listen. How to listen. Because if we're not listening for the right thing, or we're not listening in the right way, we're likely not to hear when God speaks. And scenario number 3, who dat? Who dat? Samuel. This is the beginning of Samuel's story. Samuel, because he was a promise from God that his parents dedicated him to be raised in the temple by Eli, the high priest. And so from a young age, he's growing up in that environment. And he has this experience that's familiar to most of us. The Lord called out to Samuel, who answered, "Here I am." He ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." "I didn't call you," Eli said. "Go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Then the Lord again called out, "Samuel." So Samuel got up, went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." He said, "I didn't call you, my son. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord and had not yet had the word of the Lord revealed to him. We know the rest of the story. Elijah sort of it's God speaking. Next time Samuel, just say, "Okay, Lord, I'm listening." But I found it profound in this description of why Samuel had not heard God's voice is because he did not know the Lord. Learning the obstacles to hearing. And we've distilled these down into 2 very simple ones because, we could break this down categorically in a whole different categories, but really there's 2 simple things that stand between anyone and their ability to hear God, whether it's as a person, as a church, or church leadership. The first of these is simply not knowing him. Not knowing him, how can we hear his voice if we don't know him? I'm glad that the writer of this particular literature said the reason that Samuel didn't recognize the voice of the Lord is he didn't know him and his word had not been revealed. So you may be among those either online or present here that you've wondered why you've never heard from God, and it could be because you've never been introduced. You've never had that encounter with him. The reason the writer of Hebrews says in the past God spoke through the prophets, but in these last days he's spoken what? Through his Son. That's the first step. And the second step is not spending time with him. Not spending time with him. You show me a little old lady in a rocking chair who's been spending time with God for 80 years, and I'll show you somebody that doesn't have a problem hearing God speak. Do we have any Andy Griffith fans in the house? Will it admit to it? Your TV's on that channel that runs them 24 hours a day? You don't have to worry about the language being cleared up or bleeped out. All right, I'm going to do an impersonation from one of the Andy Griffith people and see if you can recognize who this is. All right, bear with me. How do you do, Mrs. Wiley? Do we know who that is? Speak up. Yeah, we'll go back. Ernest T. Yeah, Ernest T. Bass. Bear with me, we'll conclude on this note. John chapter 10. Jesus speaking, "The one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. It's to him the gatekeeper opens the gate, and it's his voice the sheep hear. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has driven them out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him. Why? Because they recognize his voice. They will never follow a stranger, but will run away from him because they don't recognize the voice of strangers. Does it bother us in the least little bit to say, I can recognize the voice of a fictional TV character, but I don't recognize the voice of God when he speaks the language of my heart? I want you to bow your heads. Brother A is going to come up to lead us in a hymn. And this is an opportunity for you to make it right. You know, whatever it is that's standing between you and you're hearing from God, whether you don't know him or you simply haven't spent enough time with him so his voice is familiar to your heart. There'll be leadership team down at the front if you'd like to come to speak with some of them, or come to the altar and pray, or speak to somebody outside under the tent. But let me lead us in prayer, and then we will conclude our service. Father, we have to plead that we recognize your patience and your long-suffering with us. Because how often have you spoken and we've ignored your voice? And we've done the wrong thing. And we've heard and we've ignored. And we've thought that crossing T's and dotting I's were checking the boxes were what were important, and not a living relationship with you, where you walk with us and you talk with us and you tell us that we're your own. So, Father, in this moment, in our response today, help us to know that step that we need to take in order to hear you clearly and plainly, that we might be obedient to your claim on our lives. It's in Jesus' name we pray, and for his sake. Amen.